Hey everyone, David here back again to review The Walking Dead once more, and this time it is for the 6th episode in Season 5 entitled Self-Help. And in this episode, we finally figure out what happened with Carol at the end of last week's episode. She was rolling in, and now we're gonna see how... Wait, what? Yeah, what the hell, AMC? I mean, yeah, complaint number one about this episode is not even about the episode itself. It's about the placement of the episode. After leaving us on a cliffhanger last week with Carol rolling in to hopefully save the day along with Daryl on the outside and save Beth from Slaptown, we are now treated to an episode of Abraham and the group trying to get to DC out of nowhere. And what... That's just weird. Now, first of all, it is an improvement in and of itself for this episode to focus on these people instead of Beth, because like I've stated in last week's review, Beth is one of the most expendable characters for me on the show so far. So that is somewhat of an improvement, but you already started that story and you left us with that cliffhanger only to put this episode in the middle, and then next week we'll find out what happened with Beth and Carol and Daryl and that whole Slaptown scenario. It just feels very inconsistent, but I was immensely surprised to learn that this whole episode focuses on Abraham, Glenn, Maggie, Rosita, Tara, and Eugene heading to DC, and along the way they encounter many obstacles, mostly finding a vehicle for transportation, obviously, and as well as the walkers that are in their way. And the weird placement of this episode this week aside, I really did like this episode, a significant improvement over last week because it handles characters that I actually do like, that I do care about. Glenn and Maggie are there, and of course whenever they're in peril because they're so likable, even though I'm hoping they get developed a little bit more because they've kind of been one note in this season and part of last season so far. I mean, they cuddle together, they talk about what each other are thinking, and then it doesn't really go anywhere. So I'm hoping that we hit a particular plot point in the season for these two to have some kind of conflict. Even though, like I said, I love seeing them together as much as the next guy, but you know, I don't want them to become boring. But the main focus of this episode were two particular characters. One of them was Sergeant Abraham Ford, and I really did enjoy this because I found him to be one of the more colorful characters that was introduced to The Walking Dead. So now we actually get to flesh him out by having flashbacks intertwined with the main subplot here that reveal why he is so desperate to get Eugene to DC, leading up to him and Eugene's introduction to each other by the end of the episode. And sure, it's a background story that we have seen before where this guy lost his wife and kids to the apocalypse. But even though we have seen it before, there was just something about the way that it was executed and acted by the actor who plays Abraham Ford. I can't remember his name, but he did a really good job at selling that story that we've seen before, and adding the little detail of his family being horrified by why he did what he had to do to protect them. That made it a little bit more tragic. Sure, it's a little bit more stupid on the family side. I mean, come on, he just did this to protect you. He's not gonna hurt you. But to play devil's advocate like Eugene did in this episode, I can kind of see why the family will get frightened, because maybe this guy was a very mild-mannered, even though he was a sergeant, but he knew where to split his military life apart from his personal life, like you're supposed to. So maybe at home he was mild-mannered and calm and sweet. So to see him pull off such brutality, even if it's for the right reasons, you know, there's going to be a part of you that's going to be frightened. So, like I said, giving the family the benefit of the doubt, I can see why they were frightened. And so that detail alone made it more sad and tragic and made me feel more for Abraham. So that really did flesh out the character and really added some personality to to a character that I already thought was pretty colorful, and found him to be one of the more interesting characters on the show so far. And obviously everybody gets affected by what is going on with him, especially Rosita, who we learned he kind of has a thing with her. And to be honest, it was kind of disturbing, especially that particular scene, because he's like old enough to be her dad. So it's okay. Anyways, from there, I segue to the other character that is the other focal point of this episode, Eugene, Dr. Eugene. Or as I like to call, Alan from The Hangover, because he has turned into that character after this episode, which is quite sad because I found him to be one of the most interesting as well, but for different reasons. He had a personality that I haven't seen on a show like The Walking Dead before, where he's very, very introverted, but he's able to deliver a sense of humor by not having a sense of humor. I don't know if that makes any sense. And he was able to deliver that a couple of times in this episode, mainly surrounding the subject of his hair and why he has it. Those were some genuinely funny moments, and his deadpan delivery is what made me laugh during those particular moments. And he also was responsible for what I'm going to perceive to be one of the best scenes of season 5 so far. Him hosing down those walkers with the fire hose and having all the flesh of those walkers just splooshed by the pressure of the hose. That was actually a pretty cool and badass scene, but it was not enough. Yeah, all of these things, the humor of and the subject of his mullet, as well as that cool scene with the water hose, was not enough to redeem him of what he reveals by the end of this episode. The first thing that he confesses to Tara in that really... First of all, that scene was already kind of creepy with not only Ford doing it with Rosita, considering the age difference, but we also have Eugene seeing them. So not only does he come across as a creepy dude, but then he reveals that he actually sabotaged the bus to crash. And the excuse he comes up with is to say that, oh, I feel like if I prolong the journey, I will have you guys around more because after I solve this thing, you guys are gonna let me go. And I'm like, dude, I mean, come on, that doesn't make sense. And that's where I started thinking, oh, Eugene, okay, let's hope to God that was just it. Let's hope it was it. But right when Ford is about to hit his boiling point, and in a scene that was actually quite intense because Glenn and everybody just had enough of Ford's stubbornness that is driven by the tragedy in his past with his family, that they're just like, you know what, stop. And they're all yelling at each other or whatever. And then Eugene lets it out. I am not a scientist. I don't know anything. And it crept at the back of my mind like, okay, I think Eugene's bullshitting here. I think he really doesn't want to get to DC because he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know how to cure this. He's not a real scientist, and therefore he wants to prolong giving away the truth. But when things culminated to such a peak, he just said, there's nothing that I can do here besides confessing I am not a scientist. I don't know jack shit about fixing this thing. I wanted to save my own ass. And playing devil's advocate just like Eugene did, I get it's that kind of world where if you want to survive, you got to do whatever it is to survive. And Eugene is almost not, like I said, I'm playing devil's advocate here for a very brief moment. Eugene is metaphorically already doing what Abraham and to an extent Rick do physically, which is to kill other people to survive, like they did with the hunters. Eugene kind of did that, like I said, metaphorically by lying and manipulating the reality and telling lies to save his own ass. And people died indirectly. He indirectly killed them, like Bob and all those people that he listed prior to the events of these characters getting introduced in season 4. But now, I'm switching devil's advocate mode off, and I'm just going to say he legitimately turned into Alan, Zach Galifianakis' character from The Hangover, who was cool in the first movie, but then in second and third, he was doing shit that you're just like, okay, you're not thinking like a human being, and therefore you're becoming unlikable. Especially in the second movie where he said he wasn't going to do something, and then he did it. And here we got Eugene pulling this shit, and I'm like, oh, dude. Now I'm going to feel like the other characters where we're like, okay, you know what? Because of the fact that you're a human being, and we're not going to resort to the methods of the governor or the hunters, we're going to keep you around. But don't expect us to trust you with anything. And sure, it was a little intense to see him getting the shit kicked out of him with Ford, but I can kind of see where Ford's coming from after being led astray for so long. And only to end the episode with that scene of them two finally meeting and Eugene saying, I have a mission. it's so sad. So, but hey, that's not to discredit the episode. I'm not saying this is a bad thing about this episode because it made me feel something. It made me feel emotive. It really did take a turn that I wasn't predicting whatsoever. I mean, I had, like I said, an idea after Eugene let that whole thing out about sabotaging the bus, but I was second guessing myself, only for the truth, despite, like I said, clues being there for me to look at and be like, okay, I think this might happen. The truth still hurt because I really did feel betrayed by Eugene because he was becoming an interesting character for me just as much as Ford. So I find it very appropriate that they decided to focus on these two characters in this episode, whereas the other characters do in fact get affected by it. They're not going to react to it in a very unrealistic way. They're going to be like, what? They're ciphers for us, the viewers, the audience, to be like, why is this happening? And I think the episode excelled very much at that. My only complaint about the episode, well, besides the placement of it this week, but that's mainly on AMC's part, is that there is that rather lengthy segment in the middle of the episode where they do find that bookstore and decide to stay there the night and then move on in the next morning. And I feel like that was somewhat of a lull compared to the beginning and end of this episode. I feel like it was dragging on just a little too much. It was very slow paced. And in this episode, not only do we have Glenn and Maggie, like I said, not doing anything new besides talking to each other about what the other is thinking. We have that really strange. I mean, it wasn't uncomfortable to watch necessarily because from a particular perspective, you can kind of see where Ford was coming from because it's after some time of not having any, getting some wherever you can, scientifically, medically, it does the body good. So there's my excuse. But it was kind of strange to see that Ford and Rosita, anyways, and then leads to the confession by Eugene and him being creepy in that scene by watching them. That's just weird. So it had all those things for it, and it also started off really weird with, I think it was Ford humming that song or singing that song, and I don't know, it just felt weirdly placed, and I feel like that montage was just going on a little too long of them setting up. I'm like, okay, I get it, you're setting up, let's move things along. That would probably be my only complaint. That entire segment I felt dragged on just a little too long and was a little bit too slow compared to the rest of the episode. But once again, another solid episode and definitely a big improvement over last week. But there is a part of me that wishes that we could have seen the resolution of last week's plot instead of just putting in this episode. Something tells me that next episode with Daryl and Carol was supposed to happen this week, but at the last second they're like, nope, switch it, and then we're gonna get it next week. I don't know. I don't know. It might be next week. It might be the week after that. Who knows? But I will say that this week's episode was solid on in my opinion. And for that, I'm willing to give episode 5. I think at the beginning of this episode, this review, I said episode 6. My bad. No, it's episode 5. I don't know why I thought it was episode 6, but episode 5, Self-Help, a solid 8 out of 10. I do think it was a pretty good episode. Just wish they could have tightened up the editing during that middle part. So thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you guys thought of this recent episode of The Walking Dead, and I'll see you guys next time. But before I go, I want to show off this rather cool shirt. Check that out. Grand Walking Dead. I don't know. I'm really proud of this shirt. I just think it looks really cool. I'm hoping to get the cast's attention on this because it's really nice. Just wanted to put that out there. Thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you guys next time.